Okay, now, so as he goes through the book, he brings in previous statements and tries to show how they relate. And he told us that the whole of the creation is set up in a hierarchical structure, that there are certain elements of divine energy at the top, and then those elements of energy filter down, and then they are translated into the activity of angels, and then angels translate the activity down to the details of our world. So, and as I said then, and he's going to reiterate now, taken naively, you get the picture that he set up a system, and then he went on vacation, and the system carries on managing what happens below. But that's dead wrong. Because in addition to setting up the system, he manages the system at every level in every detail. Which then leads to the question, so why have a system? And the answer is because it expresses different qualities of divine action. Some are ends and some are means, some are all things considered and some are only on occasion. And the different levels give us a way of understanding the different types of divine action that there are. But it's not as if he's uninvolved or disconnected or allows it to operate on his own. So now he's talking about the fact, as we said last time, that each person is given a different challenge in life, a different quality of soul and a different challenge in life. Would we know that the quality of the soul, we would see that the challenge is just right for that soul. Some of the conditions of your life are only because of your challenge, which means you can't judge the conditions of a person's life against his actions. Because some of the conditions of life have nothing to do with his actions. They're not compensation for his actions. You can't raise the question, did he earn it? Is it just that he should get this or not? Because it's not in response to the actions he performed, it's the nature of the challenge that he's been given. So, I made a bracha before. So, all of this structure is built in from the top and filters down. And then he says, the highest wisdom, he writes here, scrutinizes, it's not a bad word, scrutinizes the whole system from the beginning to the end to make sure that at every level what's going on is what was intended. Nothing's left to chance. So now he says, all of the pleasures and pains of this world exist as a challenge. Now, we have to be a little careful now, because he's going to tell us in a little while that, for example, some pains are suffering because of mistakes that were made, because of crimes that were committed, to, let's say, to help atone for those crimes. So the two pictures now are very radically different pictures. One looks to the future, one looks to the past. If a person committed a transgression, he may get pain as a result of the transgression, and its purpose may be to cleanse him from the transgression. On the other hand, he's telling me pain may be part of the challenge that I have to live with pain, so as I can fulfill the purpose for which I was created. So those look like two very different pictures. One is based on the past, one is based on the future. But what he's saying is this: even if it's based on the past, it's also a challenge for the future. It doesn't work automatically. That's a person is suffering because of a transgression that he committed, and the transgression and the suffering is supposed to produce atonement. It doesn't happen automatically. It has to be welcomed for that purpose. A person has to say, if this suffering is meant as a cleansing of something I've done wrong in the past, I welcome it, I'm glad for it, I'm happy for it, and I'm thankful for it. Only in those conditions will it work. It's not willy-nilly, it's not unconditional. So the fact that he's getting an opportunity to be cleansed from his past transgression is a challenge that he should accept it as such. So when he makes the statement that everything is a challenge, that includes cases where it works for the past. It's just like, for example, a person does a transgression. Now, in our legal system, some transgressions are punishable by death. And I will insert a footnote here. People who don't know this are often very, very misled as to the nature of our legal system. For the legal system to decree death for a transgression, in all but one case, there have to be witnesses, he has to be warned before he performs the transgression that if he does this, he's going to die. And he has to answer the warning and say, I know, I'm doing it anyway. Only then does the legal system require that he should be killed. And the difference is gigantic. Let's imagine poor Philip Cohn, grew up in San Francisco. What a terrible start. And he wants to smoke a cigarette on Saturday. And he takes out the cigarette, he takes out his lighter, he's about to light up. Reuben and Shimon come around the corner, and they say, oh, you're dead, you're dead. You're going to light a cigarette on Shabbos? You can't do that, you're going to die. Now, if Philip wants to smoke the cigarette, if that's what he wants, what is he going to do? He's going to say, oh, gosh, thanks, guys. I forgot. I got all mixed up. I thought today was Friday. You're absolutely right. Thank you so much for reminding me. You're my friends. I love you. Have a nice day. And when they wander off, he'll light up a cigarette and smoke it. That's what he'll do if he wants to smoke the cigarette on Shabbos. Why would he say to them, I know. You're not telling me anything I don't know. I know it's Shabbos. I know it's forbidden. I know you die for it. In your face! Watch! Here I go! Why would he do that? If he does that, it's not because he wants a cigarette. He's virtue signaling. Sorry. I didn't mean to make a political comment. He wants to demonstrate anti-Shabbos. He knows it's anti-Shabbos. There are two witnesses watching, saying, I want to show you that I'm breaking Shabbos. That's what you die for. You don't die for breaking Shabbos. You die for publicly demonstrating that you want to die, to violate Shabbos. The only exception to this rule is someone who is seducing others to idol worship. There, we hide witnesses behind the curtain, and we say to him, what were you talking about yesterday? Could you repeat to me what you said yesterday? Yeah. There's Baal worship tonight. We're having a Baal party. We're serving bourbon. We're going to dance around the fire. We're going to worship Baal. And you are inviting me to come? Oh, yes, by all means, come and join me. Then the witnesses come out, they grab him, and they prosecute him, and he dies. But only for that. All other capital offenses are only when the person takes a premeditated anti-Torah stance, not because he has a desire for the thing itself. So that's something which you should need to know, which you should know. At any rate, so everything is a challenge for the future, even those things which are generated by past actions. Now he says, he says there's another feature in the world that God decreed. Now, when he says it that way, it implies that we accept it because God set it up that way, but there wouldn't be any necessarily logic to it. And what he's saying here is something that I've mentioned to some of you in the past. There's a cause and effect type relationship. I put the word in type for a reason. Maybe we'll get to it a little bit later. There's a cause and effect type relationship between a person doing a mitzvah and the future conditions of doing a mitzvah. A person who does a mitzvah makes it easier for him to do the second time. The conditions get easier. First of all, it reinforces a certain type of motivation, and the stronger the motivation, the easier it is to do in the future. And second of all, over a period of time of consistent mitzvah observance, the Kodesh Baruch Hu will make the conditions easier. A person who serves God in penury, in terrible poverty, will come eventually to be able to serve God without being doing it in poverty. A person who does it simultaneously with suffering other drastic demands on his attention and drains on his efforts, like a health problem, like war and peace, like people you're responsible for, elderly parents who need help, and so forth and so on. Those things will be eased, and it'll be easier for him to do it. He creates the conditions of his own observance by what he does, and the vice versa. A person who ignores his obligations, even when things are easy, then things will become harder. They will. So there's one of the things that determines the circumstances under which you live is your own actions. This now is not built into conquering the goal and conquering the slice of perfection that you were assigned to conquer, except where the piece of perfection that you were designed to conquer includes the fact that when you act, you have these consequences, and that's part of the process by which you achieve your perfection. But it doesn't have to be so. This can be outside of that process. It's something that's extraneous to that process. So when you ask why a person is in the condition that he's in, part of the answer is because of his own actions, and part of the answer is not. Now we have to be careful here. What then is the significance of these good consequences, these good conditions that are created by his actions? How are they related to his actions? And here, there's a famous statement in the Talmud, Schar b'hayam aleika, reward in this world doesn't exist. So now, you have to be very careful. First of all, as I have said to some of you, blanket, universal, absolute statements in the Talmud aren't meant as blanket, universal, and absolute. That's not the way they are meant. It's not our literature's style. Just like any culture, when it has its literature, you have to learn how to read the literature. And in our sources, there's a famous statement by Rabbi Yochanan, Ein lamedim min haklolos. You don't take a general statement as if it is universally correct. You don't take it that way. It wasn't intended that way. When it says all A's are B's, what it means is generally, most of the time, you could expect it. That's the influence that it has, but there will be cases which aren't so. And Rabbi Yochanan goes on to say, even if the statement you're considering says all A's are B's except for X, Y, Z, so it gives you the exceptions, and you think, okay. A blank general statement might have exceptions, but here it tells me what the exceptions are. Rabbi Yochanan says, even there, it says all A's are B's except for X, Y, Z. P, Q, and R also might be counterexamples. There might also be exceptions. Never should you take it as covering the whole ground. One of the ways you see this is by taking this statement and putting it into context with other statements coming from the same tradition with the same authority, and you see that taken blankly and absolutely and universally they contradict one another, and you see that it wasn't meant that way. So that's the way you have to understand the statements that are made. I'll give you two examples where you can see how this must be so. There are many statements comparing one mitzvah with another mitzvah, and one statement is that tzitzis, the strings on the end of a four-cornered garment, that mitzvah, putting strings on the garment, is equal to all 612 others together. Golly, that does sound a bit extreme. Believing in God, not worshiping idols, keeping Shabbos, this mitzvah of strings is equal to all 612 together? It's very hard to take that literally, hey? And you shouldn't take it literally. What it means is that in the paragraph of tzitzis, it says, if you'll do this, you remember all the other commandments and do them. Aha! If you do this in the right way, it reminds you, keeps it in the forefront of your mind, and it brings you to do the others. It's not equal in punishment, it's not equal in reward, it's not equal in severity, it's equal because it reminds you. That's all. There's a pair of verses in the beginning of the book of Exodus where it speaks of Moses and Aaron and Moses, reversing the order. So the Talmudic comment shows you that they're equal. No, they're not. Excuse me. Anybody who thinks that Moses' prophecy was equaled by anyone else in the world is violating one of the basic principles of Jewish belief, and he's out. So they're certainly not equal. They're equal in some particular respect. Not generally equal, not universally equal. In what respect are they equal? In the context of the words, it's clear that they both played a necessary role in the exodus from Egypt. To say they're both necessary doesn't mean they have equal effect. It could be 99% and 1%. You got to have 100%, otherwise it doesn't work. But they're both necessary. And the granddaddy of all of them is a verse in the book of A Song of Songs, where the king is praising his beloved, and he says, Zos Tamasi, this one is my pure one. And the Midrash says, don't read Tamasi, read Ta'omasi. Ta'omasi means my twin. Okay, let's put two and two together, boys and girls. The king in the Song of Songs is God. The beloved is the Jewish people. And God says, she's my twin. Oh, yeah? We're both creators of the world ex nihilo. We're both infinite. We're both perfect. That doesn't sound exactly right, does it? And then the Medrash goes on, in case you didn't get it, and it says, she's my twin, not she is bigger than I am, nor not, and I am bigger than she is. Really? The creator of the universe isn't bigger than one of his creatures? So again, it means in one particular respect. This is how the Ramchal explains it in the Das Tvunos. This world is created incomplete, unfinished. We are invited to be partners with God in completing it, in finishing it, in perfecting it, and it's going to happen through the partnership of the two of us together. So, similar to Moses and Aaron, we're both necessary. But we're both necessary, and he does 99.999%, we do 0.0001%, but we're necessary. And in that respect, we're equal. So all of these statements have to be reduced to a certain respect. They're not meant as universal and absolute. You have to figure out what the respect is. So now, we're dealing with the statement, Schar b'Hayam Aleika. There's no reward in this world. Well, Ramchal just told us that for some people, there's a certain principle that when you do something good, the next time you have to do it, it's easier. That's a result of your doing it. Doesn't that sound like a reward? Doesn't that sound like you're getting something that's good? Doing the mitzvah is a big performance, has a big effect on your own spiritual growth, it's a big effect on the reward you will get ultimately in the world to come. Doesn't it sound like you got something good from the mitzvah that you did? And the answer is yes, you did get something good. Maimonides says this in chapter 9 of the Laws of Repentance. He calls it Tchilas Scharo, the beginning of his reward. And the analogy that I give to this is the following. You do something for the king, something the king really appreciates. He says, here's my compensation for you. Here are the keys to the warehouse. Take the keys, go into the warehouse and take any package you like. Okay? So he puts the keys in your hand. Imagine someone saying, 3 pieces of metal. What kind of compensation is that? That's a joke. The king didn't appreciate it at all. Excuse me, they're keys to the warehouse. They're not just pieces of metal, they're keys to the warehouse. And they're very valuable. You won't have them for long. You better run, because otherwise they'll take them back. Right? When you do a mitzvah, and then conditions get better and easier to do another mitzvah, that's the keys to the warehouse. Because the mitzvahs that you do will get you the compensation in the warehouse of the world to come. And you got a step up in the means that are provided for you to be able to do a mitzvah. So that's Tchilas Scharo, it's the key to getting the ultimate schar. So when the Gemara said, Schar b'Hayam Aleika, there's no reward in this world, it means there's no ultimate reward for a mitzvah in this world. Doesn't mean that it can't be good compensation, but it's not ultimate. It's only like keys to the warehouse. Keys to the warehouse are very valuable when you use them to open the warehouse. That's what it's meant for. So there's another principle which governs the things that happen to a person in this world. And according to this principle, some bad things that happen to people are because of the bad things that they do. Some of them are. It's just that when you're looking at a person from the outside, you can't tell why he's enjoying these particular good things and suffering those particular bad things. It might be because of his actions. It might be because of the basic condition that he was put in this world. And it might be for other reasons that we are going to see. As I said last time, and Ramchal points this out, this is extremely, extremely important. This principle defeats the whole question of the suffering of the righteous. Once you have this principle on board, you can't even raise the question anymore. When you know that a considerable amount of the conditions that we live under are not dependent upon our actions at all, then the question, was it just or wasn't it just? Did he deserve it? Didn't he deserve it? Doesn't arise. Because a lot of the things that happen to you aren't deserved. They're not meant to be deserved. They're meant to be the conditions under which you have to operate. It's a little bit like another analogy that I use. Imagine, let's say, an American diplomat is kidnapped, and the president calls in the top 20 Navy SEALs, and he says to them, "Listen, this guy's kidnapped. We want to save him. It's important to save him, protect him. I need 4 of you to volunteer. This is a very difficult mission. You might get killed, you might get captured, you might get wounded, and you might be successful. Any volunteers?" Now, can you imagine someone volunteering? If you can't, you need help. Here are people who have been trained to do this. They are the nation's top anti-terrorist warriors, tops in the world. Right? This is what they were trained for. When they're sent on this dangerous mission, that's not a punishment. The danger and suffering that they will undergo is not a punishment because they're failures, because they're criminals. No, because they're highly specialized warriors who are trained to do this job, which has in it danger and risk. So the very fact that they're going into a position of danger and risk is a confirmation of the fact that they have succeeded in training themselves to be worthy of this task. That's the person looking from the outside say, they sent it to there. These must be political prisoners. These must be people they want to get rid of because they sent them into that terrible challenge. No, not at all. Not at all. That's why you can't even raise the question of suffering, of righteous suffering, if you have this principle in hand. That makes it a very important principle. I'm a philosopher, and a great deal of philosophy of religion is the problem of evil. And with this principle in hand, the problem doesn't even arise. Okay. There's another reason why a person may suffer, and that is to wake him up, to cause him to examine his actions, which until now he has not been taking seriously, and to cause him to repent. This will not be atonement. This is just a wake-up call. And in this regard, I want to comment on something which you often hear in certain circles. People are religious, especially become religious, because they're afraid of facing life. They need to have a fairy tale which comforts them. They're afraid of dying, or they're afraid of being abandoned. They want to feel that everything's really under control. They're afraid of taking responsibility for their own lives, so they have to feel there's a higher power, which is really running their lives. This is a crutch for people who are weak. And of course, the person who says that is patting himself on the back. That's why I'm not religious, because I'm strong, I'm courageous, I'm powerful. I can face life the way it is and not flinch from looking life in the face, even though it's absurd, the way Stephen Weinberg wrote and got roasted for it. The more we come to understand the world, the more we realize that it is totally meaningless. That he wrote as a physicist. Thank you very much. If you wanted to go into philosophy, you should have studied philosophy, not just physics. He was really roasted for that remark. This is their time. Now, as often is the case, from the religious point of view, there's a completely symmetrical observation that could be made. You know why you're an atheist? Because you're afraid to face real responsibility. Because you want to live a libertine life without having to worry about what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's evil. You don't want to have to delve into the nature of the human being. You take your solace from the fantasy of evolution. That's what I said, right? Fantasy of evolution. I have recorded lectures on the subject. If you want to see what my views are on evolution, you're there because then you can classify yourself as a slightly smarter squirrel, and that relieves you of all higher responsibilities. It lowers the horizons of what could be expected of you. And that's why you're afraid to face the fact that there are higher responsibilities and higher abilities, there are higher challenges to be faced, and therefore you take comfort in this and you're running away from responsibility. That's all. So what's the truth in these symmetrical critiques of each one of the other side? The truth is that there are people who are religious because they're afraid, the way they say, and there are people who are atheists because they're afraid. There are certainly failures on both sides, people who are running away from responsibility and are looking for a crutch. And it's also true on both sides that there are people who are not looking for a crutch, they're not afraid. On the contrary, they're looking at life straight in the face, and they're trying to live life in the most responsible way possible, which requires courage, which requires overcoming fear and overcoming despair and sense of meaninglessness. It's required on both sides. Excuse me 1 second. So to use it as a blanket dismissal of the religious point of view is simply a mistake. Now, here, from the religious point of view, some suffering is required to make a person rethink. We who deal in the Baal Tshuva movement see this very often. You have people who become Baal Tshuva who are fabulously successful. We have people who are in the entertainment industry and were earning as young people in 6 figures, and they had a future that was assured of them. We have one guy who became a Baal Tshuva, who's a manager of the Magellan Fund. He was dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars, and he was doing extremely well. And then he said, yeah, but this is not a life. This is not a life. And he quit, and he became a Baal Tshuva. So these are not people who are afraid, and they're not running. They're not people who couldn't succeed, and they're looking for some other way to solve their failed lives. But something shakes them up. Either it's because what they see about the people around them, or it's because something happens to them themselves, and it makes them think, really, is this all there is? It makes them search for that. That kind of dislodgement, whether it's the death of a parent or whether it's being cheated on by someone who you trusted and who you begin to wonder about the whole corporate culture. Do I have to talk today about canceling people? And people who meant it well and didn't do anything that deserved it, which is the vast majority of them. And the people just turn to pull them down. And they think, well, so let's see now. Maybe I didn't understand the world in which I'm living. Maybe there are other dynamics going on that I wasn't aware of. Maybe my own performance could be questioned. Maybe my own ideals could be questioned. They started asking themselves existential questions, which leads them to search and to see what alternatives there are. And when they do that, they discover that there's another way to picture the world, understand the world, and live in the world. So that's a dramatic change in your total outlook on life. But it can work on a smaller scale also. I remember a fellow telling me the following story, which I wasn't there, but I wish I had been there. I would have liked to see it. He had an argument with his roommate in college, and he felt that he was being treated unfairly. He was sure he was right. So he called together their mutual friends into a classroom at the university, and he told me that he wrote out on the board a whole diagram of all the possibilities, his claim and my claim, and then the counterclaims, and he labeled everything, and he explained. He said this, and he contradicted himself there, and this was against the facts, and so forth and so on. And he laid the whole thing out, and then he said to the assembled company, his friends and the other guy's friends, let's take a vote. Who's right? Okay? Everyone voted against him. Everyone. Every last one of them voted against him. He told me, it was like landing on the moon. What? And they just voted against him, and then they went their own ways. Then they debated with him and explained it with him and argued with him back and forth. But he was so sure he was right. He was so sure that we put it on the board would be so convincing, and everyone voted against him. So he told me that was like a turning point. So I've got something desperately wrong. If I predict that everyone's going to agree with me and no one agrees with me, then I have something desperately wrong. I'm out of touch. He was right. He certainly was out of touch. I helped him try to figure out why he was out of touch. But that's the kind of turning point where something like that happens and you think, something's desperately wrong. In particular, I'm out of touch because I predicted they would all agree with me and none of them agreed with me. So that forces you to rethink your life, where you're going, what you're doing. I said to him, congratulations. I could have told you 2 years ago you should rethink where you're going. but he wouldn't have listened to me. But here, it happened to him. So this is a jolt that forces a person to rethink. This is one of the reasons why people get hit with suffering. To make them rethink, who am I? What are my options? What am I doing? How am I interacting with other people? And ultimately, what does the Creator want from me? If all these people, he said to me, if all these people voted against me, it means that my actions were bad in their eyes. Then maybe they really were bad. Maybe what I was doing was wrong. Maybe I was hurting people and I wasn't aware of it. Maybe I wasn't living up to my responsibility to other people and I wasn't aware of it. That's the kind of jolt which is very creative for a person. That's another reason why bad things happen. Understand, I hope it's clear, that these sufferings that are brought upon a person are sufferings that God gives out of his love for the person. Wake up! Wake up! You're doing things that you're not aware of, that you don't appreciate. Your own life is going down the tubes. There's a tremendous kindness that God does to wake a person up. This is not it's because he's doing bad things, but it's not rejection or condemnation or punishment. It's a wake-up call. That's what you do to someone whom you love, someone who you don't want to be mired in the failure of his own terrible actions. Now, he says here, we're now in 235 in the middle. He says something here very important, which I mentioned to some of you. Punishment for crimes was only created in the absence of repentance. Otherwise, punishment is not required. And here we have to be very careful. We have to be very careful. The Mishnah in Yuma, and the Rambam quotes at the beginning of his Laws of Repentance, says that there are 4 categories of transgressions, and each category has its own atonement, its own procedure for producing our own atonement. If the mitzvah that's violated is a simple aseh, the mitzvah says, do this. Doesn't carry any specific penalties. There are only 2 that carry penalties, and that's circumcision and the paschal sacrifice. All the rest don't carry any particular penalties. And he fails to do it. He realizes what he's done, and he regrets it, and he does tshuva, it's over. That expiates that transgression completely. If it's a simple negative commandment, like, I hate to break this to you, no cheeseburgers, especially no bacon cheeseburgers. That's off the list. And he has a bacon cheeseburger because McDonald's had 2-for-1 sale this week, and he said, I'll keep kosher next week. But this week, I'm having this. He does that, and he realizes, what did I do? Bacon cheeseburger, let alone the cholesterol. It's forbidden by the Torah. He does tshuva, and he goes through Yom Kippur. That atones for the sin. That wipes it out. If it's a negative commandment that carries a punishment, particular punishment of Mrs. Bezdin, Kores, or Mishbedei Shamayim, some type of death penalty at the hands of heaven or at the hands of the court, and he does tshuva, then it requires, by the way, if I say it carries the penalty of let's say, courtly, it's a capital case, but he's not going to be punished by the court because there weren't witnesses who warned him and he didn't say even so. That's what's required to be punished by the court. But he knows what he did, and he knows what its severity is. Then he does tshuva, goes to Yom Kippur, and there is suffering. That is what expiates the sin. It means that there are no further consequences. Now, he just said punishment was in the absence of tshuva. And now we're being told that it takes, for some cases, it could require tshuva, Yom Kippur, and suffering. So he says in the Mesilas Yesharim that the way you resolve the contradiction is this. One element in tshuva is regret. Regret is painful. Think of things that you've done, and when you remember them, you think, oy, what a stupid thing to do. I really wish I hadn't done that. When you think of it, you have this sinking feeling in your stomach and this feeling of being crushed and thinking, if only I could go back in time and rewrite that afternoon. What a terrible thing to have done. That's painful. And if you dwell on that and you allow it to lodge itself in your soul, that's the pain. That pain can be enough pain. It doesn't have to require a broken leg or a rash or a sickness or a near-death experience in COVID. It doesn't have to require that. The pain of sincere regret can be the pain that takes care of sins of that type. And the fourth category is where it's a negative commandment with this terrible punishment attached, and it's done in such a way that it influences other people, so it creates a desecration of God's name in public. For that kind of transgression, it requires doing tshuva and Yom Kippur and suffering and death. And death here means premature death. Otherwise, everybody's going to die, so that wouldn't be any part of the punishment. No, dying earlier than you otherwise would have died. But if you do tshuva, you're guaranteed you leave the world clean. You leave the world clean, which means that there's no further rectification required in Gehenna, which is suffering after death. You leave the world clean, and you are ready to go into the world to come with no liabilities, no stains, no residue of the failures that you've committed. It's been wiped out. So those are the four categories, and that's the great effect of tshuva, that you're guaranteed to leave the world clean. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What if you did something and you forgot about it later, and you didn't do tshuva because you want to do tshuva, but you forgot about all the things that you needed to do tshuva for?
That's a very good question, and in the liturgy of Yom Kippur, we actually say that. We say, I have a list of things that I know I did wrong, and I have regretted them, and I've worked on myself to refocus so that I won't do them in the future. And I'm asking for mercy for the things that I don't remember, for the things I'm not aware of. I've done whatever I can do. And part of that would be, if you want me to do more, then I'm asking you to remind me so that I'll be aware of it, and I'll do for that also. But in the situation I'm in now, where I don't remember it, there's nothing else that I can do. There's nothing else that I can do. Sometimes tshuva, sometimes suffering will take care of that as well. This is not written in the Ramchal, but it's written in the Ramban. There are two types of actions for which you are responsible and which need tshuva. One was something that was done deliberately. I knew it was wrong. I knew what the consequences would be. I chose it, knowing that it was wrong. When I know that it's wrong, that gives me an advantage because I know what I have to do tshuva for, just like you said. And then I can take measures to be able to try to fix it. What about things that are done by shogeg? Shogeg means I didn't investigate carefully enough. I was lazy. And I ended up doing something not knowing it was wrong. So even when I did it, I didn't know it was wrong. Yeah, it's very difficult to come to know. Later, could happen. I could remember that I did it, but I remember thinking that it was right. But that's only because it was questionable. At the time, I didn't know that it was questionable. Now, the reason I'm guilty is because I should have known. I had enough information to know I should have made an investigation. I did make the investigation, right? But there was no marker in my book. Take care of this because it was a mistake. So that being the case, to do tshuva for that is very difficult. Rarely it will happen, but when I remember, I knew there was a problem, and I was distracted, and I was doing other things. I didn't pull myself together to investigate. I should have investigated, and then I could find out later that it was actually wrong, and then I could do tshuva for it. But often that's not the case. The Ramban says that what the Gemara calls sufferings of love, suffering brought about because of God's love for us, there are several different interpretations. So he says it's for things that you did b'shogeg, not knowing that it was wrong. And he says, for a reason he doesn't explain, the Gehenna, suffering of the soul after death, is not appropriate for that. So God, in his mercy, in his love for us, gives us suffering to expiate those types of transgressions, because you have to go into the world to come clean. There's no evil in the world to come, no residue, no stains left from things that went wrong, none. So that being the case, these are sufferings of love, which the Gemara talks about, are sufferings which expiate, which atone for these particular types of transgressions, so you don't have that residue left behind. But it is very difficult. It is very difficult. The Gemara over there says, if you see that suffering is coming upon you, check your actions. Try to find things that you did wrong and try to correct them. You didn't find, well then attribute it to a failure of learning. It isn't a result of the failure of learning, then it's Yisurim Shalahava, suffering brought about by love. Now, when you read that Gemara, you think, wait a second. The first rule was check your actions, and if you didn't find, what do you mean you didn't find? Are we assuming that your checking was perfect, that you couldn't make a mistake? Sure, you could make a mistake. You check your actions, and all the actions that you think could have been wrong, you've checked, and it's not attributed to them. But what about things that you did wrong and you don't know that they're wrong? And since you don't know that they're wrong, your checking won't reveal that. How are you going to reveal it by checking if you don't know that it's wrong? So that's what the Ramban says, that the Yisur Shalava could be for something that's shogeg, where you were irresponsible in not checking, but you don't think that way. You may not even realize that you were irresponsible. You should have done a better check, and you didn't realize that you should have done a better check. And that being the case, this kind of suffering could take care of that. So the general idea is we do everything that we know that we can do. We say to Kodesh Baruch Hu, I'm done everything that I can, and beyond that, I'm asking for mercy that I should be forgiven. I'll give you an example, a practical case where this is actually brought in halacha. Suppose someone stole something. He stole it. And he knew it was wrong, but he did it. 6 years later, he realizes, I shouldn't have done that. It's indefensible. And I have to make amends. One of the things I have to do is give the item back, or if the item doesn't exist, give equal compensation to the person I stole it from. Yeah, but 3 years ago, he left town. Now, left town in Rambam's time, 900 years ago, was not, there's birth certificates and there's internet records and so on and so on. He left town. He's gone. Where did he go? I don't know where he went. He went. Nobody in town knows where he went. How are you going to check up on him 900 years ago? So at this point, what's recommended to do is take the money that you owe him, give it to the court, and say, I took this money from this person. Well, you don't have to even say that. I owe this money to this person for whatever reason. And I'm putting it in the court with his name on it. Should he or someone who represents him show up, this money is dedicated to him. Did it get to the person whom he stole it from? Not yet, for sure. Maybe it will never get there. So in order to repair theft, you're supposed to give it back to the person that you stole it from. But once you've done everything you can do, it's not held against you anymore. Because Baruch Hu set it up that you can't do it because the person moved away. The information isn't available to you. You've done everything that you can. That's enough. So that's what you do. You do everything that you can. Say to Kodesh Baruch Hu, I know that I didn't live up to the actual rule. I've done everything that I can. I'm asking you for mercy. That should be enough, and that will be enough. So that's a general rule. You're not required to do more than you can do. Yeah.
Can you please explain when you're under bar mitzvah, you wouldn't get punished for certain things. Like when you're under 20, certain things aren't accountable, and then after that, certain things are. So can you find So
the general rule, although there are those who disagree with this, but the general rule, Rashi brings it, and others say it is that when you become 13, we're talking about boys now, you're responsible socially for what you do. If you do something wrong, then the court will apply the laws to you, and they will make sure that whatever needs to be done will be done. But in heaven, it won't be held against you till you're 20. So you're living among other people, and your actions can have consequences for other people, and there are laws. If you break the laws and the conditions are correct, the court will punish you for what you did. But in terms of your heavenly accounting, in terms of what's dictated for the world to come, it doesn't apply until the person is 20. And I think that reflects something that I think we all understand. When you look at a person developing, a 16-year-old, would you hold a 16-year-old fully responsible for all of his actions? What does he know? What does he understand? How much self-control do you expect him to have? 16-year-olds do colossally stupid things that hurt themselves. They don't mean to hurt themselves, they're just not mature. They're just not mature. So I think we can appreciate such an attitude where God says, look, you have to be held responsible for what you do to other people, because that's one way of making you behave better than you otherwise would behave. But I'm not going to hold you responsible until you've achieved an age of maturity where you have appreciation for what you're doing, and then that appreciation is enough that you should be held fully responsible for what you do. That is what is said. As I say, not everybody agrees to that, but that is a view. Yeah.
So when you say you need you find early death.
I'm sorry. Say what?
Early death for certain.
Yeah. That would only be after 20.
Only after.
That's right. It would only after 20, and of course, it would only be where the person was fully aware of what he was doing. It's not when he's unaware, right? Okay.